Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. I wanted to continue answering the frequently asked questions, and I'm going to make a video for every question so that you can pick the ones you want to have answered. And also I'm going to put an entire PDF document with all this written up. Should you, I've prepared this originally for my court case. As a backup. In the end, I didn't actually get to submit it at the time because I wasn't allowed to provide further evidence. But I hope this is useful. So when I'm finished with the FAQ series, you'll have a PDF up on my website, which you can download, which has, I think, a total of, well, I mean, I've written about 30 already. It's like, well, how many pages? It's about 30 pages long. So it's fairly detailed and it spells it out. And the idea is that you can use this in your arsenal. And also please add to it if you have, a better idea how one can describe it to people. So I explained about in one of the previous FAQs about bridging the informational gap. So if you become a victim, you have to, you get fast-tracked in a sense, and you learn about modern technology and in great detail because it's being applied to you, so you know its effect in incredible and horrific detail. But a lot of people just cannot get their head around it, and they've never heard about it. So you have to do quite a lot of work to bring them on board. But don't panic about that, and any sort of difficult questions that they throw at your door, there has to be a way to answer it because we know that it's true, right? We know that we are being attacked. We know that the military intelligence complex is running out of control. So it shouldn't be that hard to actually dispel all these, misconceptions and things like that one by one. So I'll try to do this in a sense. I'll try to give you a heads up, okay? So what are the most common things that are thrown at people, and I'll give you a rough idea of how to answer them. Now, the first question I would like to start with is, and this is something that you hear over and over. Sometimes it's not even expressed overtly. Sometimes people just think it. And this is this sentiment that people who feel persecuted by the intelligence agencies must be crazy. Now, the first way, the way I've drawn up the FAQ is I've split it into every question is answered with a short answer, which is roughly a paragraph or 2 paragraphs at most. And this is the first thing that you can throw back at people. If they question you further, there's a lot more you can say about absolutely everything. But most people, if it's just the first time they raise a question, they typically don't have the capacity to take in all the information. So don't swamp them. Just throw something back, and if they then give you further questions, then you can roll out the big guns, which is the long answer. So for every FAQ you will have a short answer and a long answer. Now the short answer for this is that it's not true. It's not true at all. So the short answer is that now we have thousands of victims, literally, not just across Europe, but thousands of victims in every country, and they all say the same thing. And it is statistically impossible, even if they were all schizophrenic or paranoid, or you name it. It is statistically impossible for random, mental health, or what's it called, a random psychological disease, or whatever you want to call it, to independently of each other create the same symptoms, the same hallucinations, and not just that, create it at the same time. Do you see what I mean? So if we had over, say, several decades, it crops up again that people think that they're being kidnapped by aliens. Okay, or they hear fairies, right? Or they think that God speaks to them, or they think, I don't know what, And then certain hallucinations will just crop up here and there with a certain frequency. But when you suddenly have a situation that's turned on where thousands and thousands of people and ever more people of all social classes, of all backgrounds, of all ages start claiming exactly the same thing in great technical detail, very fine, symptoms, very narrowly described things, then it is statistically impossible to be due to mental health. Because remember that mental health is meant to be, right, something going wrong in your head. So this has to be some sort of chemical imbalance or something to do with, I don't know what, hormones or something medical, physiological. Okay? But if it's something physiological, then it has to be somehow a random process, right? Or it's correlated with certain things, but when you have suddenly a turn on, even if it was poison our food, which just, makes us lose our mind, even then, it would have to be fairly random, because the way that, and that actually goes back to thermodynamics, and the way entropy is increased. So when you cause damage in a system, in a finely balanced system like a brain, then the damage has to be fairly random, right? You can't just cause damage to a human brain, even if it was just suddenly poison our food that makes us all go crazy and we all think the intelligence agencies are shooting at us with microwave weapons. It's just physically impossible and also statistically impossible to arise, because what we have is a situation where thousands of people are claiming the same thing independently of each other at the same time. And there seems to be a turn-on curve of ever more people claiming the same stuff, which seems to be just to coincide with the intelligence agency's budgets exploding, right? Now, for random mental health disease to coincide with that as well is just impossible. So that explanation is out, right? So what we have is, no, these people are not crazy, because there are far too many of them saying independently of each other the same thing at the same time. Okay. So, yes, and then you can also say that this is still part of the short answer. Then you can also refer people to the declassified documents about past offences committed by the intelligence agencies, and there you can point again at thousands of victims where their own classified documents say, yes, these people were part of a program. They were victims of a program, right? And you have to then also think, okay, if the intelligence agencies as a big complex human system pulled that off in the past, have there any sort of safety mechanisms been placed inside the intelligence agencies that this never happens again? And the answer is a resounding no. And if in a complex human system something has occurred once and no measures were taken that it doesn't occur again internally to the system, then it will occur again. It's just a question of time. So this is the short answer. The long answer, which is only, marginally longer, is the following. So the way you can assess what you even expect to see, right, is, as I said, you look at past programs. So if they say anybody who claims to be persecuted by the intelligence agencies is crazy, as I said, you go back to past programs and then you say, okay, what about COINTELPRO, what about MKUltra, what about all these? And there were many others. I mean, God, I can never remember. There are all these different names, and that's just what has been in the US, right? I mean, the same thing happened with every country, everywhere around the world. You can go to, offences committed in Latin America, in Asia, in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe, everywhere, right? Because these systems have been designed the same way. There are no safety mechanisms. So just look at the declassified documents and see how many thousands of people have been already affected, and then think, okay, now the systems are even bigger than they were before. Are there any internal safety mechanisms? No. Okay, then you probably expect even more victims if it happens again. Do you see? So you can use systems analysis to say, okay, this is what we expect. But then there's a much more precise way to actually try to get an order of magnitude feel of what you expect to see. And this is now the long answer, because it's slightly more involved, but not that much. So the way to pin it down quantitatively, if you wanted to do it as a scientist, I suggest the following. And you can argue with the numbers, but you cannot argue with the general method. So if you disagree with my numbers, fine, you can halve them, you can double them. If you find a better, way to estimate it, there you go. I'll now take the estimate that I have drawn up for myself, and I convinced myself that, yes, that's the right ballpark. So first of all, you start off with the following. You say the intelligence agencies are a big, complex human organization, right? I mean, that you cannot argue with, because they're fairly large and they're a human organization. And when it's large and it's a human organization, it's automatically complex. Okay. And then you say, one of the things that you can do is estimate how many offenses and cock-ups and mistakes and how much corruption and many other things do you even expect. So how many problems do you expect that a system like that would throw at you, at the external world? And the way to estimate that is to say, to first order, systems of equal size will produce, roughly speaking, an equal number of problems. Okay, so in a sense, if you've got a little company with maybe 10 customers, then they might throw up, maybe they've got an error rate of 1% or whatever, in 1% of the cases something goes wrong and their clients complain. Okay, so then you can see how long do you have to operate the system until one of their customers complain. Now, if you've got a big organization with thousands of employees and tens of thousands of customers, it goes without saying that they'll have many more problems with their clients, right? Because the system operates and it just throws problems. And therefore, a big company needs to have a proper customer service helpline, right? They have to throw serious money at it because they have to deal with all the customer complaints. Where things go wrong naturally, you don't have to have malice. This is just, neutral. I don't make any assumptions about the system. I'm just saying if it's a certain size, it will have more problems than a smaller system. Yeah, because there are more employees who can potentially do something wrong. So you can't really argue with that either, right? You agree with that? Okay, fine. Then if you want to estimate how many problems the intelligence agencies, would throw up, naturally, without any malice or any specific criminality assumptions about them, just neutrally, you have to say, okay, well, I expect them to make as many mistakes as a system roughly the same size as them. Okay? Okay, good. If you agree with this, then you would think, let's take MI5. And again, I'm not just, stomping on the head of MI5 because the BND and Verfassungsschutz and all these other secretive organizations will be the same. But for the sake of the argument and because, yes, they have, they were the first to really, try to destroy my life, I'll pick MI5. So, if you pick MI5, they are a national surveillance provider. Right? You can't argue with that because they're in charge of surveillance inside the UK. So this is kind of like a national service provider. Okay, then what you would expect is that they throw as many problems as another national service provider of the same order of magnitude. And for that, let's take what's national. Let's take British Telecom. Right? Now, British Telecom these days doesn't have a monopoly. So think about British Telecom in the olden days when they had a monopoly, So you would expect MI5 to be roughly the same size as British Telecom. And then you say, okay, but everyone has got a phone and, therefore British Telecom is bigger and, and you can't really say that. And then I say, well, hang on a second, because on one hand, that's true. But on the other hand, what does British Telecom do? They've put the phone lines down. I mean, now they've got mobile and, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but in the olden days, they put the cables into the ground, put a cable into your home, and then you used the telephone, and that was that. And occasionally there was a problem. But otherwise, that was it. Meanwhile, MI5 has to go around, apparently, search for terrorists and, criminals and fight terrorism and whatever the hell they're officially meant to be doing, right? Okay, well, that sounds a lot more involved. So there are ways to argue that actually MI5 is much bigger than British Telecom. So, depending on what numbers you take, you might end up with an even bigger number. So for the sake of the argument, and as I said, the actual quantitative numbers at the end, you can scale up or down as you like, but I'll show you the method. So using systems analysis, I would say MI5, roughly speaking, not knowing anything about them, has to be roughly the same size as British Telecom, at least. And then you can argue if it's smaller or slightly bigger. No. But that's roughly ballpark. Okay. Because they're both national service providers. So that's like order of magnitude assumption here for the calculation. Fine. And then you say, how many problems does British Telecom throw up that they themselves cannot resolve internally? You know, somehow their methods are so messed up that they couldn't resolve it internally. Well, there's actually a number for that, because in Britain there's something called Ofcom. So the Office for Communications or something, you know, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's spelled Ofcom. So they are in charge of regulating the telecommunications providers. And one of the things that they do is that they publish numbers for the complaints that they received, because if the clients cannot resolve the dispute with the companies themselves, they have to, you know, or they can go to Ofcom. So Ofcom receives those things where the clients and the customers got so annoyed with the telecommunication providers, they complain to the regulator. So this is the serious stuff, right? I mean, most people don't even know about Ofcom. So Ofcom is not the first point of contact. If you've got a problem with BT, you call BT, you know, and so on. So it's just like, again, a ballpark figure, but it gives you a good idea. Okay. Now, these days, Ofcom is in charge of all telecommunication providers, right? So not just British Telecom, but all of them. But again, taking all the complaints from Ofcom is again a good estimate, because, you know, what British Telecom gave up in terms of market share was given to all these new companies. So if you want to find out, in terms of the telecommunications sector in the UK, how many serious problems are being thrown up, you know, by these systems, by these national service providers, you go to Ofcom. And Ofcom actually published a number, or they publish it regularly, and I think this one was for, this one was for 2015, or maybe it's averaged over several years, but it's a recent number, so I'm not talking 1990s here. This is now the last couple of years. And the number I have, and the reference I shall put below, and I'll put it also into this document, is 300 complaints per day. So 300 times per day, customers go and complain to the regulator because they couldn't resolve the dispute with the telecommunication provider. Okay. Now you also have to remember that British Telecom, even though it might seem like that at the time, officially is not actually working in targeted sabotage, you know. So when they throw up a problem, it's because, you know, something went genuinely wrong and people didn't want to actually sabotage you. But in contrast, you know, the secret services, they're kind of like, have been shown to be involved in sabotage. So again, you know, British Telecom might be like the lower edge of what you expect, you know. So they're, you know, if you want to scale down the numbers, all I'm saying is don't scale them down too much, because there might be certain aspects that you haven't taken into account. Okay, but anyway, so if you have 300 serious complaints per day for British national service providers in telecommunication, I would say you would roughly expect 300 serious complaints per day for another national service provider, you know, of roughly the same size. Now, if it's 300 serious complaints per day, this would mean that for MI5, we would expect 109,500 serious complaints per year. 109,500. Maybe take a piece of paper and write down these numbers, okay? 300 complaints per day, 109,500. Check the maths. You know, I hope I've, you know, multiplied it correctly. Now, how many problems do we actually officially know about for British intelligence here, you know, and MI5? And then in the UK, there's something called the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, the IPT, and I'll put the actual link to their website there. And the IPT is in charge, it's essentially a tribunal. It's not a court, it's a tribunal. And it's the only tribunal that you can go to if in the UK you have an issue with British intelligence. So if you want to complain about them, you know, you go to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. And actually the Investigatory Powers Tribunal is very interesting, because they only publish judgments when it's in favor of the complainant. If it goes against you, you'll never get to know why. You know, you submit a complaint and you say, you know, MI5 really screwed me over. And then they take it, they look at it, and I just go, nah, sorry. You know, complaint not rejected. And then you say, yeah, but why? Can't tell you. Now try, and oh, by the way, there's no way to appeal from this court. So I submitted a complaint to them, and that was before I received death threats and an actual outright assassination attempt. And they just rejected my complaint as frivolous or vexatious. They've got a clause, and they can just reject everything as frivolous and vexatious. So that sort of court we're talking about. But anyway, so they do publish, if not the judgments, then they do publish a statistic about how many complaints they received per year. And the inception of this court was in 2010. And they've got numbers up on their website for 2010 to 2015. And they've got the complaints received per year and decided in favor of the complainant as well. And you will have the actual statistic up on the, I'll put it up on the website. There's a little, little table. And in the first year, they had 95 complaints received. And that year, they didn't actually decide any judgment. Sorry, my camera is making me green again. That's just because it can't cope with the light levels, of the moon lander behind me. But, sorry about that. And then, so the first year, the IPT received 95. In 2011, 180 complaints. In 2012, 168. 2013, 205. 2014, 215. And 2015, 251. So roughly speaking, they received a rounded 200 complaints. And the last year they received 250. So every year, so there was a turn-on curve, it went up from 95 to 180 in the first year. And it was roughly around 200 per year. Now, it means over the period from 2010 to 2015, there were 1,114 cases submitted to the IPT. So ballpark 1,000 submitted to the IPT. From the systems analysis point of view, I said we were expecting 100,000. 100,000. And they received 1,000. That's like 1% of what we expected. Okay, fine. Maybe I got the calculation wrong. Now look at how many of these 1,114 cases were decided in favor. And I'm not making this shit up, guys. You can see the numbers yourself. So out of 1,114 cases, how many were decided in favor of the complainant? If you had to guess, what would you say? Well, guess again, and again, and again. The real answer is 10. Over the 6 year, because you have to count the first year. So from 2010 to 2015, which is 6 years, they have received over 1,000 complaints. And the number they decided in favor of the complainant is 10. Well, systems analysis tells us that this is a captured court. I don't even have to know who the judges are. I don't have to make any assumptions or make any, undue allegations against them. Systems analysis tells us this is a captured court because there's no other court in the world. I mean, maybe that they are. Sorry, no, I'm sure they are. But in the Western world, a public court where literally you have two parties approach you, and remember, these are cock-ups that would occur naturally in a system. So I haven't made any assumptions about outright criminality or corruption or targeted sabotage. I just took the numbers that I would expect from a national service provider, and I arrived at 100,000. These people get only 1,000, right? That's 1% ballpark, right? 1%. Does it even make it to the IPT? So do you think that this is the most frivolous 1%? Or do you think these are the people who really got so pissed off by MI5 that they say, right, I'm going to get the fuckers? I mean, you can put your own life experience in to figure out how the numbers stack up. Now, if then, out of these 1,000, 10 are decided in favor of the complainant, I mean, this is impossible, right? Now you have to, sorry, by the way, I got the number wrong. Because the over 100,000 cases was just per year. Sorry, so I got the number wrong. In actual fact, we are expecting over 600,000 cases to make it to the IPT if all the serious complaints about MI5 that you would expect naturally from a systems analysis point of view would make it to the IPT. So it's not 100,000. To be precise, you would expect over 650,000 cases. Over 650,000 cases. And how many make it there? Just over 1,000. Right? That's like 0.2%. And then this means that 99.8% of serious issues with MI5 never get resolved by a regulator, ever. Okay? And when they even make it to the regulator, 99.2% are knocked down, are knocked out. Well, this is impossible, right? So using simple mathematics, simple systems analysis and simple statistics that your child in high school can do, you can show that the IPT is a joke. It's a joke. It's just not funny. And this joke has been now run for 6 years. So what you would actually expect, given that you expect 657,000 people to be seriously screwed by MI5, and only 10 were given right by the IPT, you would expect in the British population over a 6-year period to find 656,995 people having serious issues with MI5. Who are they all? Have you met them? Have you met them? Because I have met a lot of people who have got serious issues with British Telecom, and I was one of them. I was on their phone queue customer helpline for, and I can tell you the anecdote another time. But this is it. So are those people you would expect from simple systems analysis all crazy? And then you say, okay, but actually, MI5 is not as big as British Telecom. No. And remember, I'm taking the full national surveillance provider, right? Not just MI5 as it's officially on the books, which is like, 5,000 people or 3,000 people? No. What about the informants? What about all these like fakes and snitches and surveillance providers and gang stalkers and I don't know, the entire menagerie of these, weaponized morons? All of those, if they cock up, it would actually be due to MI5. Factor that in. Okay, but then if you say, no, it's not true, I frankly, with 5,000 people, you can't provide national surveillance services over the UK. With 5,000 people, you can't even survey Birmingham or Manchester, frankly. So 5,000 people is wrong. But okay, if you say, MI5 is not as big as British Telecom in the olden days, or the entirety of telecommunication sector, it's only a 10th. Okay, well, if it's a 10th, I would expect 65,700 people to be seriously screwed by MI5 over the 6-year period. Rounded 66,000 people, and the IPT dealt with 10, has given 10 of them right. When systems, and remember, when you just have the customer service helpline, the normal customer service helpline, then, the mistake can lie either side. Because, sometimes the client is a bit like forgetful and doesn't pay the bills, or I don't know what, right? So there, the actual, how to put it, like the statistical expectation of who cocked up is kind of like evenly spread. By the time people get so annoyed that they complain to the regulator, they typically have a pretty serious case. I mean, maybe you get a lot of crazy people complaining to Ofcom as well, could be. But I would expect, from a systems analysis point of view, that some sort of pre-selection vetting already happened by the time people actually find, I mean, it took me ages to actually find the contact details of the regulator, so there is some selection process, weeding people out, So those numbers are for fairly serious issues. And by the time you get that, you expect, the balance to have slightly tilted in favor of the client. So I would expect more clients to be actually right about what they're saying, by the time they fought all the way to get to the regulator. I don't believe that the entirety of UK is just made up of malicious people who just want to make the life of the telecommunication operators just difficult. That's not really what the British people are like. So there you go. This is your answer. This is now the quantitative systems analysis answer for, what was the original question? People who feel persecuted or brackets, screwed by the intelligence agencies are crazy. Well, I don't think so. I mean, if you have this sort of number, right? And oh, by the way, actually another way to look at this number is that 656,000, so let's say 650,000, okay? If you multiply that by a factor of 10, you get 6.5 million. If you multiply that by a factor of 100, you get 65 million. Now, a factor 100 leading to 65 million is the population of the UK. So this number of 650,000 is exactly 1% of the population over a 6-year period should be screwed by MI5, maybe in a way that they don't even notice it was due to MI5. It could be literally one of these, corrupt people in the surveillance network using their power for illicit means and so on and so on. 1%. Now, what's the rate of schizophrenia again? I thought it was something like 1%. I have to look that number up, but I do remember it to be ballpark 1%. So from that point of view, 1% of the population, schizophrenic, and 1% of the population, just over a 6-year period, will at some point be screwed, maybe in subtle ways, by MI6. If you just take a 6-year window, the statistics doesn't quite stack up at all. Whichever way you look at it, you actually end up being in favor of, of the intelligence agencies having cocked up. But, let's just take these numbers and, everybody who actually understands mathematics, please hold your ears closed and just don't think about it too hard. So even if I wanted to bend it like that, and I would say, oh, that's 1% and that's 1%, even then, I would think that if someone approaches you and says, oh, I'm being persecuted by the intelligence agencies, and if you take these 1%, which is not actually true, but, but anyway, even then you should just think, well, the chances that you genuinely are 50-50. So you either are paranoid or schizophrenic, I don't know how you pronounce it, or you're right, but it's 50-50. And in actual fact, it's the likelihood of that is much larger because, MI5 has got this certain turn-on curve per year. So you have to compare the rate of how many people get screwed by the intelligence agencies per year compared to how many people turn, schizophrenic per year. And then you get more of a ballpark figure. And then you realize, hang on a second, the rate of, turn-on for schizophrenia should be the same unless some serious shit has been put into our food. So let's just think it's the same. It's constant over time. So the percentage of people becoming paranoid or schizophrenic or the illness that they might carry turning on should be constant. The percentage should be constant. But in 2003, or starting from 2003, the budget of MI5 doubled and their headcount tripled. And this is in The Guardian. So actually, to be screwed by an employee of MI5 seemed to have kind of doubled or even tripled. So suddenly, the probability that people get screwed by MI5 just pulls away from this schizophrenia paranoia explanation. You know, because it's not true that in 2003 suddenly the number of schizophrenics and paranoids has just doubled or tripled. Do you see? So it's not time invariant what is more likely. So the bottom line is, from basic, I don't know anything about the intelligence agencies, just ballpark systems analysis, quantitative assessment, I would expect to find per year over 100,000 people who get seriously screwed by MI5, such that if they knew it was due to MI5, they would complain to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. And I think it's due to the skill or the general, you know, the skill of covering up their cock-ups within MI5 that these, you know, only 1% even makes it to the IPT. It's even less than 1% because, hang on, the actual rate of 1,000, it's like a tenth, roughly a tenth or 20% of that only makes it to the IPT, you know. So it's a tiny number. We're talking a tiny number. Do you see? And then what you would expect is a lot of people complaining about being persecuted by the intelligence agencies and never really having enough evidence to pin it down or having the courage to approach the IPT. That's what I would expect. So if you find somebody who's complaining about being persecuted or screwed or harassed or sabotaged or whatever by the intelligence agencies, chances are they might be right. That might be exactly how it is. But anyway, as I said, you can take these numbers, I'll put them into the document, and then you can scale them up or down depending on, you know, what you expect. But this is the basic answer. So I hope this settles it for all. You know, this is like an entire half an hour just dedicated to this question. But at the end of this half an hour, you should have an answer forever, every single time people approach you. Oh, people who are persecuted by the intelligence are crazy. Just tell them, listen, you either haven't thought about it for a long time or you don't know systems analysis, you know, and point them to the statistics of the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. That should clear up a lot of things, because even if you don't agree with my ballpark assessment, one of the things that is certainly true, and these are official numbers, is that there were over 1,000 complaints to the IPT and only 10 were decided in favor of the complainant. Now, what does that tell you? Thank you. Thank you for listening.